All right, we're going to talk about something that just came up in conversation between myself and a colleague of mine, and I thought it was very relevant to basically everything you're seeing today, and something that we should discuss briefly. But I think it's important enough. So let's see how it goes. But I just wanted to start out with a clip from this video that I started watching, which I think is related to what we're about to talk about.
Your grandparents were middle class. Your parents might have been middle class, but you're not. And it's not because you're lazy. It's not because you didn't work hard. It's not because you made bad choices. It's because there's a pattern in history that has destroyed the middle class in every major empire over the last 2,000 years. And that pattern is playing out in the United States right now. In 100 AD, Rome had a thriving middle class of property owning farmers and tradesmen. By 400 AD, they were extinct. Only the super rich and the desperately poor remained. In the 1500s, Spain developed a merchant middle class from New World wealth. By 1650, they were gone, crushed by inflation and taxation. In 1700s France, a professional middle class emerged. By 1789, they were radicalized into revolution because the system had destroyed them economically. In 1918, Britain had one of the strongest middle classes in the world. By 1979, it was fractured and diminished. The Soviet Union built a middle class of educated professionals by the 1960s. By 1991, their savings were worthless. Japan had the world's strongest middle class in the 1980s. Today, their young people can't afford to start families.
I have to say the caveat. The Soviet Union example, I don't think is a good one. And the reason why is because the Soviet Union began to abandon the system that had built that same what they call middle income educated group. And the Soviet Union was coming from a very different place. So that's not a great example. Saying its savings worthless economically, it's been proven that the Soviet Union was much worse off um, when it adopted capitalism in the 1990s than it was in the 1980s, in the 1980s and before. And one of a good reference for that, and this is a little off topic, would be this book. I'm currently reading it, and I'll do a little review on it at some point on this channel, called "Socialism Betrayed: Behind the Collapse of the Soviet Union." And this was written by Roger Kieran and Thomas Kenny. And they take you through the history of the Soviet Union and some interesting information about its late stages, what happened after the collapse. Another good resource on that same topic, which I'm also using as an audiobook right now, is Black Shirts and Reds by Michael Parenti. That book actually came out in the 1990s, I think 1997, and it's a good reference because it talks about the same subject matter, but just more of an immediate response because it's only 6 years after the collapse. So again, I don't think that's the best example, but that's not really the point of this video.
6 empires, 6 middle-class extinctions, all following the same 8-stage pattern. Stage 1, prosperity and growth, where a strong middle class emerges and thrives. Stage 2, peak and complacency, where the middle class reaches maximum size. Stage 3, wage stagnation and rising debt. Stage 4, asset inflation makes housing and education unaffordable. Stage 5, wealth polarization creates a two-tier society. Stage 6, opportunity dies and mobility collapses. Stage 7, political instability as faith in the system breaks. And Stage 8, either system collapse or violent revolution. The United States entered Stage 1 in 1945 and reached Stage 2 by 1970. We've been progressing through Stages 3 through 6 over the last 50 years. And right now, in 2025, we're firmly in Stage 7. Political instability, loss of institutional legitimacy, populism on both extremes. The middle class isn't dying, it's nearly dead. And Stage 8 is coming. This is the story of how middle classes actually die, why the pattern repeats across centuries and continents, and why America is following the same trajectory that destroyed the Roman middle class, the Spanish, plus some discretionary spending, and most importantly, have realistic hope that their children will do better than they did. That last part is crucial. Hope, mobility, the belief that hard work leads to advancement. When that belief dies, the middle class dies psychologically before it dies economically. Middle classes emerge during periods of economic expansion and opportunity. After wars, when labor is scarce. During technological revolutions, when new industries create new jobs. During imperial expansion, when wealth flows into the core. Rome's middle class grew during the Republican expansion. Spain's grew from American silver. Britain's grew from the Industrial Revolution. America's grew after World War II when we were the only major economy left standing. But here's what history teaches. Every empire that creates a middle class eventually destroys it, not intentionally, not through some conspiracy, but through a predictable sequence of policy choices that benefit the elite at the expense of the middle. And once the sequence starts, it's almost impossible to stop. The pattern is simple. First, wages stop growing even as productivity increases. The gains from economic growth go entirely to owners and the wealthy, while workers' share shrinks. Second, to maintain living standards despite stagnant wages, the middle class goes into debt. Consumer debt, mortgages, student loans. Debt becomes the way to afford what wages no longer cover. Third, assets inflate. Housing prices, education costs, healthcare costs all rise faster than wages. Things that used to be accessible to the middle class become privileges of the wealthy. Fourth, wealth concentrates at the top. As assets inflate and wages stagnate, the gap between rich and middle grows extreme. Fifth, opportunity disappears. When wealth determines outcomes more than work, mobility dies. The latter is removed. Sixth, political power follows wealth. The wealthy use their power to rig the system further in their favor through taxes, regulations, and policies. And seventh, the middle class, seeing the system is rigged, loses faith in institutions and turns to political extremes. And eighth, either the system reforms dramatically, which almost never happens, or it collapses into either economic breakdown or revolution. 6 empires have followed this pattern, and all 6 destroyed their middle classes. Let's trace the pattern from ancient Rome to modern America and see why stage 7 always leads to stage 8.
So this is an interesting commentary, and this is sort of to me the what. And but I want to really expand on why I believe the the specifically in the United States, but why this is happening, and one of the things that I think will end up potentially saving the back end of maybe the worst part of the tragedy of this, but it's still we're still going to get hit. Let me show you something, and I'm sure you've seen this graph before. One moment. So this is a graph taken from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it shows the United States from 1945 roughly to through 2005, and you can see how it's continuing on to this day. How productivity and wages have grown. You'll notice that this is extremely. It becomes extremely, and that's not even volatile. It's actually pretty continuous. Um, from 45 to about 75 or so, maybe a little bit before, wages and productivity actually kind of they go up together. In fact, in some stages, wages are outpacing productivity. That actually happens a lot in the 50s and early 60s. Then when you get to about the early 70s, and perhaps it has to do with Nixon, ending the convertibility of dollars to gold, among other issues, you'll see there's a separation. Now productivity continues to rise, but wages are stagnant. Now, that's another example of potentially the what. So, what does that mean? That means that we have an abundance of productivity in our economy. We're creating things, we're creating services, we're creating products, we're making things, we're doing things. Our output is high and it's only growing, but our income for that output is not it's not keeping up. So the people who are making the stuff are not able to keep up with the pace of the production of that stuff, and at some point lose the ability to buy said stuff. That last part is important. Here's my theory on the psychology of the growth of the middle class. And this is a slightly different take that I haven't really heard anybody talk about, but my take on it is that you have the industrial revolution. Prior to the industrial revolution, in the early stages of capitalism and obviously in the feudal system, the owners of the economy are before that they're the landowners. In the industrial revolution and the early stages of capitalism, they are the factory owners, right? Among others, but they're the factory owners. In those roles, the factory owner does not need educated men, okay? And same for women. But does not you don't need educated people to work in your factory. You need people that understand how to use the equipment in your factory. Those people are not customer facing. Those people are not you don't need them to be the lawyer. You certainly don't need them to interact with the general public. What you need them to do is come into the factory, churn the butter, whatever it is that you're doing, right? Turn the wheel, push, pull, whatever. And they need to know how to do that safely, quickly, and do it for as long as possible until the end of the day. And then the product is produced and moved out. That's what you need. Then you have this change. You have this evolution in capitalism, in the capitalist society, where and it's not just the capitalist society, but they're really leading the charge in this change, where suddenly technologically the workforce is changing. And now it's not just about industry in terms of physical mechanical labor, but now, for example, the banker needs people to work in the bank. The head of the bank is not going to be the teller for the consumer that comes in and is exchanging money, right? They're not going to do that job. They sit in an office. They may not even be in the location of where the bank is, especially when you have these larger conglomerates and companies instead of just small local businesses where the business owner is a member of the staff, right? That whole model has changed. So what happens? Well, you need people that understand the basics of how the bank works. You need people that can add, that can subtract. You need people that can maybe even use a calculator, right? You see where I'm getting? So now what happens is you need a slightly more educated staff. Okay. So you need a different kind of labor. So you encourage culturally people to go to school, not out of the goodness of your heart, not out of the ethos of your ethics or anything of that. It's because you need that laborer, you need that person who can work for you, who can work for the system. Then what happens over time is the evolution is now, well, you need somebody who can use a computer. You need the lawyer who can go on a computer. You need the banker. You need the analyst. You need the stockbroker. You need all of the different services that became the predominant services. And now I'm really talking about the United States. All the middle income jobs are jobs that were needed for the owners, the ruling class of the society. They needed them to do the job. Someone has to punch in the keys on the computer. Somebody has to be the analyst and read the charts. Somebody has to understand how the economy works. So, guess what? I want kids taking Econ 101. I want kids who understand, the basics of computers. I want kids and then what happens? That's your supply and demand for labor. It's not just the guy who knows how to use the wrench. That guy is almost marginalized in this economy. We have a shortage of that. But what we need more people that can come in and use Microsoft Excel. We need people that can do PowerPoint presentations. We need people that can read charts. That's what we need. That's the skill, right? Okay. So you keep going along that line. What happens to that labor? Well, the psychology of the middle income person is the ruling class can't have peasants, okay? And I'm being dramatic when I say it, but they can't have peasants sitting in the bank. If somebody is opening a bank account, or somebody is requiring the services of a lawyer, or somebody is requiring the services of a stockbroker, they are not going to want to purchase those services from somebody who has dirt on their shirt, dirt on their hands, somebody who doesn't speak articulately, someone who doesn't know how to use a computer, somebody who doesn't. That's not attractive to sell the service. So what happens? The owner of the service creates a class of people that are going to be the purchasers of the service, or at minimum, going to be the laborers of the service, so that the purchasers of the service can comfortably communicate and are attracted to deal with the servicers. See, when you buy meat, you're not buying it from the butcher. You're not buying it from the farmer who raised it. No, you're buying it from the supermarket. You don't see it. But when you go to the bank, who are you dealing with? Are you dealing with the owner of the bank? No, you're dealing with the bank teller. Well, the bank teller has to know how to use a computer. The bank teller has to understand how to communicate with you, has to understand what you mean when you talk about checking and savings accounts, APRs, and all that. How can they do that if they're not educated in that system? That's why they got the education. That's why the owners of the society provided that. But now you reach a stage. And then last but not least, because you need them to speak a certain language, you need them to dress a certain way. They have to earn enough money to purchase the services to get to that point. So I need the college student who understands econ. Well, they have to be able to purchase that service. So I got to pay. Remember, this is capitalism. They have to pay for the services. So I need to create a class. I have to pay my workers enough so that their kids can go to college, so that they can learn the skills, so that they can come work for me and my kids. I need to pay people enough so that they can purchase the books, so that they can purchase the classes, so that they can purchase the suits, so that they can learn how to speak in the manner to sell the services I want them to sell. Well, what stage are we in now? Now we're in the stage where the servicer, not the customer, but the servicer is a computer. It's not just that the person punches in the data into the computer does the whole thing. The artificial intelligence problem is that the computer is the whole thing. So what happens to the middle income? I know manufacturing, robotics. I understand that replacement. I understand that, but that's not what this video is about. This video is about the middle income worker. What happens? And I'm not saying all lawyers, not all stockbrokers, not all bankers are going to be replaced. But instead of having 5 people on a team or a sub team or 10 people, you're going to need 1 or 2. Because now the computer is the servicer. And that's okay because the customer interacts with the servicer online. You don't know you're dealing with a computer. You don't even care. You're doing on a website. You're going on a mobile app. You're not looking to talk to people. We've changed that culture. We've thrown that culture out the toilet or out the window. We don't look to interact with other human beings. We look for the quick fix, which is just click, point and click, or press the button on your phone, and that's it. So what happens to DoorDash when you don't have drivers for DoorDash? You have autonomous driving cars. You have robots that pick up the food, and I'm pressing the button to key it in, so I don't need to talk to anybody. Same thing with the stockbroker. The stockbroker, I'm not dealing with any humans. I'm going online. Same thing with the lawyer. Guess what? The AI can recite the law. The AI can look at your case and analyze what laws it is interacting with. Maybe you need 1 or 2 lawyers in that department, but you don't need 30 anymore. That's what's going to kill the middle income, because now the servicer who was purposely put in that position to supply a service on behalf of the ruling class is now being washed away because they're not needed anymore. But here's the hitch. The servicer is the customer. The customer is not just the ruling class, the customer is the middle class. So now if the middle class isn't buying suits because they don't go to work, and the middle class isn't buying food because they don't have any money for that, and the middle class isn't going to the bank because they don't have any money in the bank anyway. They don't have any money. They're not purchasing the services. So now what is going to come to fruition is, well, the customer and the servicer were always similar. Now, if you remove one, do you still have the other? That's the great question. That's where the productivity and the income line being so far apart comes into play, because the income line could stay stagnant, but it could also disappear if you're replacing all the jobs. But if you replace all the jobs, who buys the services? Well, in this system, that's a big problem. In other systems, it's not. The purpose of capitalism is maximum extraction of capital. This is a private enterprise. This is a private company. This business operates as individuals have to do what they can to provide the maximum amount of money to the owners of this society, who are the shareholders. You and I are not shareholders. We are simply just laborers. And if they have to get rid of us in order to expand their capital, that's what they will do. But who purchases the services? That's the question. That's where we get into the ethics. That's where we get into, or I shouldn't even say the ethics. That's where we get into the calculation, where the capitalist is going to have to say, well, there's a law of diminishing returns here. I've now maximized profitability and efficiency, or I've taken it to a level that's so high that I don't have any humans buying the services. So now I'm making less money. Now I'm making less money because I don't have enough people who are capable of buying the service. Now, this won't be the case if one business lays off people. But if this becomes a global thing, if the global middle income economy gets destroyed, that will be the problem. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but I can tell you this: the answer does not lie at the feet of the people who want maximum extraction of capital for their services. The answer is going to lie in a system where the point is not to extract every penny, but the point is to live well. And that's where the BRICS societies and I believe the communist states, the communist parties in the socialist states, will far exceed the quality of life, safety, and happiness of that of the West. You're going to see an inversion of the propaganda we've been fed about what life was like in the East versus in the West. Now you're going to see a complete inversion because you won't be able to hide it. Hopefully, it doesn't get to that point because I don't want to see the violence. But if you suddenly unemploy millions of people, they're not going to quietly starve. They're going to do what it takes to survive. Thank you, everybody.